I hope you can hear me clearly. Hi, thanks for joining us. I'm Ben. I think probably most of you probably have met me before. I'm with the CCAM Secretariat. We have our team has joined in as well. Um, Thank you for joining us. Welcome. This is our very first webinar of the year. Thanks for your participation. So purely on ESG, it's more of an awareness, and we are focusing on a topic of why data leakage and fraud are ESG issues. So I wish to hand over this floor over to the president of CCAM, Mr. Vic Sivalingam. He's on the call here now in the webinar. And subsequently, we'll hand over to our partner, TechCOM, who is actually will be presenting for the day. Right? Hi, Vic.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank
Can
you,
you hear
sir.
me?
Loud and clear.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, dear members of CCM, friends, partners, and all well-wishers who have actively supported the Contact Center Association of Malaysia. This webinar, being the first under the ESG umbrella, is a very important journey that we've taken. Last year, we took the initiative to sign up and tie relationships with our partners, TechCOM Ventures, and we built a ESG program, leadership program for the industry. It was a first step into creating awareness around ESG, which is a very important part of every organization, every company's way of working, the way of running businesses and whatnot. And it's quite important that as the contact centers become closer to the enterprise in management, in decision making, that they all speak the same language. And ESG, understanding of ESG at the contact center leadership, customer service leadership, helps the contact center stay connected to the brand and enterprise. That was the thinking. And in our partners who have expertise in this area, they developed something together for CCAM, had it registered and recognized by CMI, as well as supported by HRDC. It was a monster of a task that took more than a year to come through together under the proprietary of CCAM and pulled together by TechCOM Ventures. And we had our pilot class as well. So step by step, we want to make sure that the industry is ESG matured, bringing leadership capabilities that is beyond what it was in the past and something that's really future-proof and future-ready. Hence, we will be running more webinars and we'll be running more certification courses this year under the ESG leadership program. Today is a very thought-provoking topic: why data leakage and fraud are ESG issues. Because there is always a misconception that ESG is related to something green, something about governance, or something about environment. Not necessarily so. It's almost everything around business and sustainable practices. And it's a broad scope of topics, which we believe all paths and all roads would lead to the understanding of ESG. So today's topic is very key into the contact center area data. We handle so much of customer data. We are governed by customer confidentiality matters. We deal with customers on a lot of matters related to scam, fraud, and whatnot. And that is real. But how to approach it, how to manage it, how to work in a preventive way is something we need to understand better. And those things are easily governed, not just as a compliance or an IT control, but under the umbrella of ESG in a more strategic way of thinking. Hence this topic today. I'm very excited of 2026 journey that we will take on ESG with TechCOM Ventures and also supported by HRDC, with the whole industry, with our members all coming forward. You can call yourself at the end of the day, you're green or you're ESG compliant or you're ESG certified. But together as an industry, we want to stand tall in the eyes of the business and the brands that we work and support. So happy learning, happy journeying with CCAM and ESG program leadership. I would like to call my association partners, TechCOM Ventures, led by Ms. Birinda Muti, to maybe say a few words and then take on this 1 hour discussion. I will step aside. Otherwise, I can continue talking forever, but I don't think that's the right thing to do. Let's dive deep into why some of these issues around ESG comes to light, and it's important for us to take a good understanding. Happy learning. Thank you very much. Back to, I like to call Birunda now.
Thank you, Vic. And a very good evening again to everyone. It's definitely a pleasure to be on this session where we will be actually looking into why data leakage and fraud are ESG issues, which is very important for the contact center industry. Well, this entire initiative, it's not just a program that we have designed as a 2 days session, but then it's more of a awareness. It's very crucial for contact centers and BPOs to understand why it's very crucial in terms of moving towards a green contact center initiative under sustainability as we are moving towards a more greener transformation, not only just in one vertical, but in a wider organizational scope. Hence, I would like to introduce Kavita, who will be actually giving her insights on the importance of today's webinar. Thank you. Kavita, over to you.
Hi, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you to CCAM and TechCOM Ventures for bringing this group together. It is a pleasure to be speaking with professionals who sit right in the center of customer trust in Malaysia. So today's session is not just about compliance, blame, or even having to point fingers. It is a shared conversation about how data leakage and fraud have evolved into ESG governance issues and why contact centers play a critical role in protecting trust, reputation, and long-term sustainability. When the customers speak to your teams, they are just not sharing information. They are placing confidence in your organization. So ESG governance is ultimately about how well that confidence is protected, especially when something goes wrong. So let's look at the next slide. Let me just take you through why this matters right now. So we're looking at digitalization having outpaced governance. Data is now critical business asset. Trust is fragile and hard to build. So ESG is no longer about reporting or checking boxes. It's about how organizations behave when they're under pressure, when things go wrong, and when trust is tested. Digitalization has certainly outpaced governance. Many organizations have rapidly adopted cloud systems, contact center automation, mobile e-wallet platforms, and customer data analytics. These tools deliver efficiency and growth, but governance often lag behind. Without clear policies, accountability, oversight, organizations expose themselves to operational and reputational risk. Data is also one of the organization's most critical assets. Every customer interaction, call recording, transaction, profile entry has real value and risk attached. Mismanagement of this data is no longer just a technical failure, it is a failure of governance. It is a failure of leadership and also accountability. This trust is fragile and it's sometimes very hard to rebuild. One leak, one fraud incident, or one poorly managed breach can erode years of brand reputation almost instantaneously. Customers, clients, partners, they remember breaches longer than fines, and the ripple effects impacts revenues, impacts employee morale, and also investor confidence. Across Asia, ESG scrutiny is increasingly rapidly increasing, sorry. Regulators, investors, multinational clients are also paying closer attention to governance practices. They look around the areas of data protection and fraud prevention as well. Organizations that cannot demonstrate strong ESG governance are now at a competitive disadvantage. In short, strong ESG governance is no longer optional. It determines compliance, credibility, resilience, and also long-term sustainability. Let me move on to looking at the ESG lens on the third slide, where the data fits. So when we look at environment, we look at data center using energy, right? When we look at social, we look at privacy, consumer, consumer harm, identity theft. So we look at those related to contact centers in data leakages and fraud. When it comes to governance, we look at oversights, we look at controls and accountability and ethics. But when you want to simplify ESG in this purpose, environmental, we look at how we use resources such as energy and infrastructure. Social focuses on people, customers, employees, and communities. Governance is about oversight, accountability. Data leakage and fraud may feel technical, but the harm they cause is social because customers suffer losses. And then there's anxiety. Employees experience pressure and blame. The root cause in many cases is usually governance. So when we talk about data protection today, we're really talking about governance maturity. The preceding slides will show you more about the data leaks and data breaches overlap. On this slide, you can see how they often overlap and why it matters. A data breach is an incident where sensitive, protected, or confidential information is accessed and disclosed without authorization. A data leak, on the other hand, is when data is exposed, either intentionally or unintentionally, without proper protection. Often, leaks lead directly to breaches. So, in practice, the distinction matters less than the outcome. Both result in compromised data, lost trust, potential financial, regulatory, and reputational damage. For example, an unencrypted customer database sitting on a shared server could be considered a leak. Once an external party accesses it, it becomes a breach. So this overlaps is also a signal for governance. If you keep having repeated leaks turning into breaches, it indicates a systemic weakness. It could be a lack of access control, insufficient monitoring, or even poor employee training. These are gaps that can be addressed. Essentially, governance failure allows small leaks to escalate into major breaches. For contact center and data-driven operations, these risks are particularly high because volume of sensitive data handled daily. Personal customer details, payment information, health data is constantly moving across systems and people. Without clear ownership, monitoring, and rapid response plans, small exposures can quickly become crises. I'll move on to the next slide as to why data leakage is a governance failure. So when you see weak oversight of data access, there could be insufficient monitoring and control, poor vendor and third-party controls. There could be lack of rigorous due diligence, inadequate board visibility. Board often lacks a clear, comprehensive view of an organization's data security posture and potential risk. And the fourth one, reactive instead of preventive culture. A lot of organizations tend to address breaches after they occur, rather than investing in proactive measures and continuous improvements. Data today is one of the most valuable assets organizations hold, comparable to cash or even intellectual property. So governance determines who owns that risk, how it is monitored, and how decisions are made when something goes wrong. When we see the same type of data breach, leak, or fraud happening again, it is not simply bad luck or unfortunate coincidence. It is a reflection of governance. More precisely, the lack of effective governance. So governance is about setting clear expectations, defining accountability, monitoring performance, and enforcing controls. If the system and processes are weak, no matter how good your technology is, incidents will continue to occur. So in data-driven environment like contact centers, it could be unclear of the ownership of data. There could be lack of training. It could be ineffective escalation protocols. These governance issues are not technical glitches. These relate back to leadership. So leadership plays a critical role, how the incidents are treated, what lessons are learned from it, whether corrective actions are implemented, and determining whether a problem will reoccur. When leadership ignores these patterns, fails to enforce accountability, it sends a signal that governance is not a priority. From an ESG perspective, these repeated incidents are red flags for investors, for clients, for regulators. They are not isolated events. They are symptoms of structural weakness. So addressing governance gaps proactively is the only way to break the cycle and prevent incidents from reoccurring. Recognizing that this distinction is crucial for protecting trust, mitigating risk, and demonstrating ESG accountability. We are now being in Malaysia. Let's look at Malaysian context. My next slide. Why we are vulnerable. So there is rapid digital adoption going on. There's accelerated embrace of digital services all across various sectors and industries, means more potential entry points for cyber attacks. Okay, sometimes the speed of adoption can sometimes outpace the implementation of security measures. There's also high mobile and e-wallet penetration. When you have a significant portion of the population utilizing mobile devices and e-wallets, personal and financial data frequently transit through these platforms, making them prime targets for data breaches and fraud. Before I move on to the next one, let me just share with you an insight that I got from last night from a IT VP from one of the international banks in Malaysia. We used to hear how people would send you links on Facebook, Messenger, and they'll tell you, don't click on the link, I've been hacked. Now it's phone call via WhatsApp. I've had this person telling me last night that his cousin received calls from his cousins saying that, he was short of money and, he needed some money for some transaction. And it sounded exactly like him on a WhatsApp call. And the photo or the number that he called from resembles very much like the number that the cousin had. And to be honest, a lot of us can't even remember numbers. We would just look at the photo at the WhatsApp profile picture and we just assume that's the person calling. And that's what's happened. So they've even hacked WhatsApp as well. And WhatsApp is supposed to be encrypted. So, the cyber attacks are getting very rampant and and they sometimes outpace all the security measures that everyone has in place. So the third one is outsource contact centers. So there's also reliance on outsourced contact centers that often introduces third-party risks. Data privacy and security controls might vary across different vendors, could create potential weak links in the data protection chain. There's also fragmented data ownership, where it's unclear or it's spread across multiple entities. It's also important to understand why we are so vulnerable. We are a mobile-first nation. We use e-wallets, QR codes, apps, online banking, delivery platform. From an ESG perspective, this is progress, but progress also has its own governance risks as well. So how our vulnerability is not because we are careless, because our digital growth has outpaced our governance maturity. Governance maturity usually comes a little bit slower. It's like a rat race, and it's always a little bit 1-2 steps behind. Because everyone's jumping onto the bandwagon of automation, digitalization, AI. We sometimes fail to look at governance, that we need those coming on the forefront as well, at a faster pace. as well, so that it will be able to manage when it comes to governance, able to manage when it comes to accountability as well. So I'll share with you a Malaysian case study, the next slide. My Sujatra. So we had My Sujatra during the pandemic collecting sensitive data. Okay, collected a lot of personal and health data, tracing information, vaccination status, right? There was an allegation of unauthorized access and monetization. There's a lot of privacy breaches, security and lack of security for personal information. Then it led to public outrage and trust erosion. There was a lot of public backlash. Some of us didn't quite trust government handling our data, handling our information. I think some of us even stopped using My Sujatra for that. Government was forced to respond because the magnitude of public concern necessitated an official response from the government. What happened was concerns emerged around who owned the data, who had access, whether it was commercialized. These, from a ESG governance lens, this highlights something very, very critical. Even government-backed platforms are not immune to governance gaps. Transparency was lacking, accountability was unclear, communication came in a little too late. And when that trust is broken, especially when data is involved, recovery is extremely difficult. For organizations, this kind of lessons are very clear. Without strong governance, perception alone can destroy the trust that we have in any organization. Another case study, the next slide, will share with you telco and customer data leaks, where you've had several high-profile cases involving illegal sale of vast database, including customer personal information. I think we've all known this. This has been around for several years. This incidents all have happened before, where I've received even till now 10 phone calls from the same bank saying that they heard that I need a loan, and I've never shared such information. There were investigations that revealed data breaches were facilitated by insider involvement, indicating inadequate internal controls. A lot of customers were targeted for scams. I still get scam calls. I get my phone ringing, and when I answer, there's no voice. There's nobody there. It's just some music playing in the background. And I'm actually quite afraid to even say anything because, they might use my voice for AI, synthesized voice, and somebody might be receiving calls from me thinking it's me. This is especially very relevant for CCAM members, right? Malaysia has seen repeated reports of telco customer data being sold on the dark market. These leaks were not caused by sophisticated hackers. They were insider driven. They're usually employees or third-party vendors with legitimate access. So these are all about weak access controls, poor monitoring, lack of segregation of duties. So it's not a technology failure, it's a governance failure, right? So when that happens, brand reputation suffers long-term damages. Call centers then become frontline, dealing with angry, fearful, and distrustful customers, which is going to be another bigger burden on your organizations as well. The next slide will also share. The next slide will share some more scams and frauds that happen in Malaysia. I think some of you all would have known about this. There was this Macau scam where they impersonated legitimate entities, they deceived victims, leading to a lot of financial losses. There's SMS phishing and fake delivery links, impersonation in using leaked data, fraudsters utilizing illegally obtained personal data, convincing or impersonating somebody else. Malaysia is one of the heavily targeted countries for scams, right? We get fake bank calls, SMS phishing, courier services, delivery services, maid services. These scams work because scammers already have partial real data. They have got names, they have got phone numbers, they have got transaction histories. These data often originates from leaks in contact centers, service providers, third-party vendors. Malaysia loses billions of ringgit annually to scams. But beyond that financial loss, there's also emotional distress, loss of confidence and erosion of trust in institutions. From an ESG governance perspective, fraud is just not a crime problem. It becomes a systemic data governance problem. We need to govern data properly, otherwise fraud becomes an inevitable presence in our normal business transaction, a normal business life. The next slide will highlight as well why contact centers are high-risk nodes or high-risk areas. Because you handle sensitive personal data. There is also high staff turnover. There's always constant onboarding, offboarding cycle, increases risk of security vulnerabilities as well. There's performance pressure, where sometimes metrics-driven environment can sometimes lead to shortcuts, compromising security protocols. It's also sometimes often outsourced when we rely on third-party providers to introduce additional layers of risk. It doesn't sometimes work that way. The next one. Malaysia Data Center is not just about infrastructure. It is a custodian of critical data. They house vast majority of organizational digital assets. So security is very important and imperative as well. There's also access to control and monitoring risks. Physical and digital access points require stringent controls and also continuous monitoring as well. There's ESG expectations from global clients. Okay, clients, especially international ones, increasingly demand strong ESG performance, and they look at security practices as well from the data center partners. Supply chain responsibility is also another key link in the digital supply chain. So data centers are no longer just technical infrastructure sitting quietly. They are governance anchors because you create a center of data management. You create a center of holding personal data, information. Every customer interaction, every transaction, call recording, chatbot exchange, any CRM update, it all flows through or stored in a data center. It means data center determines how data is protected, who can access it, how long it is retained, and how quickly breaches are detected and contained. Data center sits in the intersection of all three, which is about accountability, control, and oversight. Strong policies at the contact center level cannot compensate for poor access control, weak monitoring, or unclear ownership. It also sets the tone for vendor management and third-party risk. In Malaysia and across Asia, organizations move towards cloud adoption, regional data hubs. The role of data centers become more critical. They're no longer just IT assets. They've become trust assets. So when an organization governs data responsibly, the answer is often found in how its data centers are governed, audited, and led. So the next one is how breaches destroy trust. The next slide, please. Thanks. So when there is a breach and there is trust erosion, okay, it's often spoken in an abstract term, but in reality, it shows up very clearly in business outcomes. It affects revenue, talent, and also company valuation. From a revenue perspective, once customers lose trust in how their data is handled, behavior changes. They hesitate to share information. They reduce engagement. They even opt out of services, move on to competitors. For contact centers, this often means higher call volumes driven by complaints, longer handling time, lower customer satisfaction scores. All this increases operating costs while reducing lifetime customer value. Trust erosion also impacts talent. Employees do not want to work for organizations that are associated with data leaks, fraud, or ethical lapse. Recruitment becomes harder. Staff morale drops. For contact centers, where people already operate under pressure, reputational issues amplifies burnout and disengagement. From a valuation and an investor perspective, trust is now priced into the business. Investor increasingly view data governance failures as indicator of weak leadership and poor risk management. A single breach can trigger regulatory fines, legal exposure, loss of contracts, long-term brand damage, which will directly affect company valuation. So trust is not just a soft issue, it is a measurable asset. When governance around data protection and fraud fails, the cost is not theoretical. It shows up on your balance sheet in staff turnover and how market values your organization. We move on to the next slide where we talk about brand and reputational impact. So all these data leaks and frauds and scams can affect your brand and reputation. There can be media scrutiny, giving you negative press, could be social media backlash, regulatory attention, looking at financial penalties, operational restrictions, long-term brand damage. Financial penalties from data breaches or fraud incidents are often most visible, but they're actually the smallest and the shortest lived impact. It's a fine, we paid, and then business goes on, right? But reputational damage lasts significantly longer, and it's far more difficult to repair. Fines are one-off financial events, okay? Organizations budget for them, insure against them, and they recover over time. But when customers begin to question whether their personal information is safe, business partners become more cautious in sharing data or entering into strategic collaboration. It starts affecting your business, starts affecting your organization. These reputational damage can spread very quickly as well. In today's digital and social media environment, news of a breach travels faster than any other news nowadays, especially if it's a negative news. And people tend to remember, public memory remembers the worst incident. It doesn't remember the good incidents. Maybe people have been wired that way after, so many times of hearing a lot of things. They just remember the negative things, the negative impact that happens. From an ESG governance perspective, the reputation reflects organizational culture and leadership accountability. Ultimately, organizations can recover financially from fines, but rebuilding trust requires consistent behavior, transparency, and a long time. That's why prevention through strong governance is always much more valuable than recovering after a breach. It's preparing for the future, and it's also being proactive rather than a reactive reaction. The regulatory realities in Malaysia, the next slide, will show what we are looking at. PDPA 2010, there's amendments, Bank Negara guidelines, Bursa Malaysia's ESG expectations, right? Malaysia's regulatory environment is evolving rather quickly. Organizations can no longer afford to treat data protection as a secondary or a purely technical issue. Data protection, data privacy has become one of the major ESG topics that Bursa Malaysia is expecting each organization to look at as well. The PDPA clearly sets out how personal data should be collected, stored, and used, and even protected. Enforcement has now become more visible, more serious. Regulators are increasingly willing to investigate complaints, impose penalties, and demand corrective actions, particularly where negligence or repeated lapses are involved. Beyond PDPA, there's also emphasis on operational resilience and governance, expectations from third-party management, outsourcing controls, board-level accountability. Okay, this is relevant for contact center and data centers because they often sit at the intersection of multiple organizations' data ecosystem. At the same time, ESG disclosure expectations are rising across Malaysia and the wider region. People are paying, regulators, investors, business partners, these people are paying closer attention on how companies govern data, manage cyber risk, protect stakeholder information. Governance is no longer measured by compliance checklists. It is increasingly assessed through transparency, leadership oversight, and risk management practices. Organizations that treat data protection and fraud protection as ESG governance priorities will be better positioned to meet these expectations, maintain trust, and sustain long-term business resilience as well. We're looking at regional and global ESG pressure across Europe, US. There is the GDPR, or the European General Data Protection Regulation, sets a global benchmark. A lot of severe penalties for non-compliance can impact companies worldwide. The SEC, Cyber Risk Disclosure Rules, it mandates publicly traded companies disclose material cybersecurity incidents, influencing global reporting standards as well. There are others like investor ESG due diligence and also supply chain audits. Local firms operating in Malaysia are not insulated from global governance expectation. As it is in the last 2 years, ESG framework has undergone upheavals and changes as well. We used to only be focused on GRI, TCFD, several of the frameworks and guidelines. It's now encompassing a lot of others. We're looking at EU CSDR as well, even though we are not directly related to EU practices, but because they set a benchmark. So we are always looking to set ourselves against the highest benchmark. And if your organization is based in Malaysia, serving European clients, these rules can apply directly as well as it is in US, where those rules will start applying to Malaysian companies who are dealing with US organizations or even US government. These investors are increasingly conducting ESG due diligence before making funding decisions. They don't only assess financial performance. They examine the governance, risk management, data protection. They also looking at how you audit vendors, how you audit partners, looking at your privacy safeguards. So they influence business continuity. They look at client relationship, investor confidence is so important when it comes to global ESG pressures. It's no longer optional. It is one big world anyway. And Malaysia has actually been having very high benchmark against a lot of frameworks that we're using right now. We are focusing a lot on EU and other frameworks because it increases the ESG framework resilience and due diligence as well. So we are not just doing just for Malaysia. We're doing Malaysian ESG reporting framework so that we are on the same level as any other ESG reporting coming out from US or coming out from EU. So there is no differences in that. So we're not on a different standard. We are always benchmarking on the highest standard. Currently, the highest standard is EU CSRD. That's one of the highest standards that we're looking at right now, all the EU regulations. And we need to integrate governance practices that meet both domestic regulation and international expectations if we want to remain competitive in this global ecosystem. As you can see in the slide, these were some of the offenders of the, let me just open and share. These were some of the offenders for violating GDPR, fines in Europe. You could see Meta is one of them, Amazon, Uber, and LinkedIn as well. So in Europe, there's no, there's no like, okay, lah, we'll just give you a smack on your wrist and tell you, just watch out, be careful next time. They are pretty serious when it comes to this. So the next slide tells you why this is a leadership issue. Okay, because culture is set at the top. Okay, leadership's commitment to data integrity shapes organizational values and practices. Governance is also a board responsibility. Effective oversight ensures robust frameworks for ESG and risk management. Incentives drive behavior. You're aligning rewards with responsible practices, fostering accountability and ethical conduct. Silence enables risk. If you ignore potential vulnerabilities, it escalates and it threatens and undermines an organizational resilience. So culture is shaped by your leadership behavior. Whatever a leader prioritizes, tolerates, or ignores, it becomes normal. If data protection is treated as a technical thing, staff behave accordingly. If it's treated as a trust protection, your behavior change. So it starts with the leadership mindset. If data governance is not discussed at the board or senior management level, it's often seen as an IT problem. These policies exist on paper, but they're not lived in practice. Training becomes a checkbox exercise. Incident reporting is delayed, avoided. Staff focuses on speed and convenience. In contact centers and data-intensive environment, this risk is amplified. Frontline teams handle sensitive information daily, under pressure to meet performance targets. If leadership does not clearly communicate that data protection, ethical handling of information, as much as productivity, staff will prioritize what is measured and rewarded. So you need to see how it shapes incidents, how incidents are managed. If leaders downplay it, it becomes a crisis eventually because it will escalate quietly. And if leaders openly prioritize governance and invest in controls, employees feel empowered to act responsibly and report these concerns early. So strong governance is not created by technology alone. It is created by consistent leadership, messaging, its accountability. And for example, if leaders treat data as a strategic asset and a trust obligation, the organization will too. If they treat it lightly, consequences eventually will surface through breaches, through fraud, loss of trust. ESG governance red flag. The next slide will show there are many red flags in corporate governance, but I'm just picking up this 4. There no data ownership clarity. Sometimes there is a lack of defined roles when it leads to accountability, and these gaps end up increasing, and then you have vulnerability showing up. Sometimes there's no breach response plan. There is an absence of protocol. It can prolong and damage it further. There's no board reporting. Sometimes there's inadequate communication prevents informed decision making as well. There is also no vendor audits. A third-party risk remains unaddressed, exposing the organization to external threats. These are early warning signs of future incidents. These points are not abstract risks. They are early warning signs of incidents waiting to happen. Okay. If there is unclear ownership, it becomes a fundamental failure because governance starts with accountability. So these kind of things are very important to look in and to make sure that that the organization is prepared. If the organization does not have, for example, a tested response plan, it will lose precious time. It will mishandle communication and then unintentionally worsen their reputational damage as well. Poor responses can often cause more harm than the breach itself. There could be a small breach, it could have been managed, but if you take a couple of days to respond to it, that poor response can erode the trust that the customer has in you, because they feel it's not an important thing for you to address immediately. So these red flags signal governance gaps rather than technical shortcomings. When they exist, incidents are not a matter of if, but it's always a matter of when. Identifying and addressing these warning signs early is one of the most practical ways organizations can strengthen ESG governance before a crisis forces you to make the change. What good governance looks like in the next slide will clearly show clear data accountability, defined roles, defined responsibilities for data management protection, regular risk assessments, proactive identification, mitigation of potential ESG risks, staff ethics, comprehensive training programs, transparent incident reporting. The question is always about ownership. Who owns data risk in the organization? Not in theory, but in practice. Is it IT? Is it compliance? Is it operation? Or is it clearly defined, documented, and understood across the teams? When ownership is vague, risk management becomes fragmented, reactive. The second part is monitoring. Who's watching the risk landscape? Who's checking on the new systems, new vendors, new campaigns, new customer touch points? Okay, it requires ongoing oversight, not annual reviews. And this is very critical in contact center environments where data moves fast and is at a larger scale. Action, when something goes wrong, who has the authority to decide, to escalate, to respond? Delays are often caused by unclear escalation path, can cause more damage actually than the original incident. And it's also important to see that there's always constant improvement through learning. Organizations that treat incidents, near misses, and audits as learning opportunities become more resilient over time. Those that hide issues or fear blame tend to repeat them because there's no improvement, there's no learning from what has happened before. So having strong ESG governance is not about having a flawless system. No, nothing is flawless and nothing is perfect. It's just having clear roles, transparent processes, a culture that values accountability, improvement. When clarity exists, trust follows. And trust is one of the most valuable assets an organization can hold. Now, I will show you a simple practical action in the next slide for contact centers and data centers. Okay. When organizations think about protection or fraud prevention, the instinct is often to invest in new technologies, better systems, more tools, more dashboard. Technology matters, but real improvements do not always start there. They come from process, they come from culture. Process means clear workflows. Who can access what data, why they can access it, how they can access, how the access is reviewed, can it be revoked? What happens when something unusual is detected? Simple, well understood processes prevent incidents than complex tools that sometimes you and I may not fully understand. Culture is an even more powerful. It shows up in everyday behavior. Do staff feel comfortable reporting mistakes or near misses? Are agents trained to pause when something feels wrong? Are supervisors encouraged to question shortcuts or taken under pressure to meet KPIs? In contact centers, speed and efficiency are critical, but when it's rewarded without safeguard, risk increases. So a strong governance culture balances performance with responsibility. Good news is process and culture improvements are achievable. They do not always require large budgets or advanced technology. They just require leadership attention, consistency, and reinforcement. What investors and clients are asking in my next slide is all about how data is governed, who is accountable, how incidents are handled, evidence of control. So they are increasingly asking how it's governed, not just whether policies exist. It's nice to see things in paper that you're going to follow such system, but how is it managed? When you have high volume, um, is accountability a key focus? They want to know who's responsible when something goes wrong. They're not so particular about job titles or um, they're not interested so much in that. They just want to know who's making the decision, who's authorizing this. Is the leadership involved? And when incidents happen, how are the incidents handled? Are they going to be demonstrating transparency, speed, structured response? Or is it going to be very perfect speeches? 'Cause you and I are all clients for somebody out there. We all know incidents can happen. So what we want to assess is maturity and readiness. Also, having evidence of control is also critical, such as training records, access management, audit outcomes, response drills. We need to see documentation, demonstrable practice. These builds confidence. For CCAM members, right, this shift is very important. ESG governance is now directly linking to winning and retaining contracts. Strong data governance signals reliability, resilience, and professionalism. Weak governance raises red flags that can influence procurement decision before pricing or even performance is even discussed. And then my next slide, where we talk about from risk to responsibility. So data leakage and frauds are not IT problems. They are trust problems. They're also leadership problems or challenges, if you want to put it that way. They're also ESG governance challenges, problems. They're not just technical accidents. They actually reveal not just governance, they reveal the quality of governance. How is it handled? Is it handled well? Then the trust strengthens. If it's handled poorly, trust collapse. So ESG governance is not punishment. It is protection. Protection of customers, employees, brands, protection of your long-term sustainability as well. So I thank you for the role that you play as guardians of this trust, as guardians of trust for customers, for employees, for investors as well. Now, we'll move on to the final slide. So let me just tell you a little bit about TechCOM Ventures. We are a lead in innovation and sustainability. And today we are here. Contact Center Association of Malaysia and TechCOM. We are here because awareness of data leaks and frauds are very, very imperative for your organization. It is not just about technicality. It's not just about IT. It's about governance and how it plays a very imperative role, how it plays a very strong point when it comes to your ESG governance, ESG reporting. It cannot be seen as a separate item. It cannot be seen as, let's look at it when we have time, or let's catch up with it a little later. It's not that important yet. It is very imperative because it is overlapping several fundamental pillars of governance and social, which is directly related to customers, to employees, to investors, to your brand name, to sustainability. So I've come to the end of the webinar.
Thanks,
Can we
Kavita.
have some
Yep.
Q&A first? Yeah,
Thank you. That's right. Thanks a lot, Kavita. Thanks, TechCOM
you're
team.
welcome.
We are now opening up we have got a couple of minutes more, 4 minutes left, but we will open up for Q&A. So you may type in your questions and I will get Kavita to address if there's any. Over to the audience.
I think that's a good sign.
Alternatively, you could also choose to drop in a note to the secretariat. I think everyone knows Jude in here, or also the CCAM secretariat email. Jude, maybe you can just type the email address here in case. Okay, I believe. Yep, I think. All right, there's no questions, I believe.
There is also a training. CCAM and TechCOM looks forward to seeing you all at the workshop on the 24th and 25th of February. In respect, as it's Ramadan month, it's going to be an online and interactive training as well. I think you can get more information from CCAM.
Yep.
On the training.
So that's right. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. On behalf of the association, thank you, TechCOM. Thanks, everyone who have attended today. Looking forward to connect again. Likewise, mentioned on the training, which is actually open to just not leaders, but pretty much anyone who is actually taking the journey of a future leaders, right? So even your team leaders and whatnot. So Jude is our contact point. Please reach out. Jude will also be reaching out to everyone to check on your interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for your time.
Bye.